Well, hi, and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. I'm glad that you joined us, and I hope that this next 20 or 30 minutes is meaningful for you. You are going to need a Bible for this study, so if you don't have one, you're going to need to hit pause and go get one. As you can see, I don't have a TV screen around me. I don't have any special effects or some layover over the top of me or whatever. We read the Bible together. And so you're going to need to have your Bible in front of you, and it would be helpful to have a pen in your hand, and we are in the book of 2 Kings in the Old Testament. So hit pause, go find your Bible, find 2 Kings in the Old Testament, and then we're going to launch into what I think is going to be a really cool story today. All right, and I want to start this way. There are certain words that when you hear them, they just conjure up an immediate emotional response. You don't have to know all the details, you don't have to know the whole story, but there are certain words that bring mental pictures to mind. For instance, if I throw out a word like honeymooners. Now, for some of you, depending on your age, the first thing that comes to your mind is like Jackie Gleason. That's not me, that's before me. But what about this? What if I said they're on their honeymoon? I mean, immediately for me, I think of the words do not disturb. Right? I mean, these words bring responses. What if I say the word graduation? There's something you see in your mind. Grandson, nature, laughter, Krispy Kreme. Sorry, I'm kind of craving that right now, but there are certain words that bring wonderful scenes and vivid colors into your mind as soon as you hear them. And then there are also words that bring unspeakable volumes of pain. Right? I mean, suicide, slavery, divorce, abortion. I mean, when you hear these words, they just carry this revulsion and this sadness. And one word that's like that is the word leprosy. Now, I don't think many of us have much experience with leprosy, thankfully, but still, most of us kind of recoil at that word. It's just an ugly word because it conjures to our thoughts these bad feelings, even though I think most of us are foggy for lack of detail. But when you hear that word leprosy, it automatically warns unclean. Stay away. Do not touch. Keep clear. And there's just a foreboding mystery to those words. They have leprosy. Philip Yancey, in his book, Where is God When It Hurts, describes his visits with a man named Dr. Brand. And this is just really fascinating. If you've never read this book, I think you would really enjoy it. But Dr. Brand spent most of his life working with leprosy patients in India. And I'm reading now, this is a quote from Yancey, and it's kind of a long one, but stay with me. Yancey writes, "We have been conditioned to view leprosy as one of the most cruel diseases imaginable. And it is cruel, but not at all in the way other diseases are. It primarily acts as an anesthetic, numbing the pain cells of hands, feet, nose, ears, and eyes. Most diseases," Yancey writes, "are feared because of their pain. So what makes a painless disease so horrible? Well, for thousands of years, people thought leprosy caused the ulcers on hands and feet and face, which eventually led to rotting flesh and loss of limbs. Mainly through Dr. Brand's research, it has been established that in 99% of the cases, the destruction follows solely because the warning system of pain is gone." All right, God gives pain literally as a gift. So Yancey writes, how does the decay happen? Well, in the villages of Africa and Asia, a person with leprosy has been known to reach directly into a charcoal fire to retrieve a dropped potato. Nothing in his body told him not to. Patients in India would work all day gripping a shovel with a protruding nail, or extinguishing a burning wick with the bare hands, or walk on splintered glass. On one occasion, Dr. Brand tried to open the door of a little storeroom, but a rusty padlock would not yield. A patient, an undersized, malnourished 10-year-old, said, "Let me try, Sahib Doctor," and he reached for the key. With a quick jerk of his hand, he turned the key in the lock. Brand was dumbfounded. How could this weak youngster outexert him? And then his eyes caught the telltale clue: a drop of blood on the floor. Upon examining the boy's finger, Bran discovered the act of turning the key had gashed a finger open to the bone, yet the boy was completely unaware of it. To him, the sensation of cutting his finger to the bone was no different from picking up a stone or turning a coin in his pocket. Do you get the point? Leprosy is death by degrees. All right, there's bodily injury and physical scarring and ignorant abuse and 1,000 different disorders, and all because this person cannot feel the sensation that we call pain. Now, all this is a lead-in to what's really a fascinating Old Testament story, and it's going to probably be one that for some of you, you're more familiar with than the ones maybe that we read last week. But we're reading stories about Elisha right now. The series is called The Days of Elijah, and we started by reading through the life of Elijah, and then we just kind of kept going here for a few weeks as Elijah went to heaven and passed off the baton to Elisha, his understudy. All right, and as we've read, we've been trying to follow how Elisha ministered in that culture. Well, today we're going to read a very well-known story from his life. This is an interaction with a powerful, wealthy, maybe even famous man in his area, and this guy had everything. But he also had a disease that threatened it all. This man had leprosy. Now, we can get a brief biography of this guy in the book of 2 Kings. So take a look with me right now at 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1. Okay, and we're following together. Now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master and highly respected, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. This man was also a valiant warrior, but he was also a leper. Now, the text does not give us chronological history, but it seems like Naaman's leprosy did not surface or activate in his body until his later years. And it's pretty clear that in every way apart from this disease, that Naaman had it all. He was at the top of the heap in the kingdom. He was respected. He was a trusted confidant and friend of the king. And because of his victory over King Ahab, he was also every soldier's idol. And in fact, Josephus, the historian, believed that it was Naaman who shot the arrow into the air that found his mark and killed the king of Israel. That it was Naaman who killed Ahab, which would have immediately catapulted him into legendary status. But now his predicament is hopeless ruin, because notice there's this great contrast. He is a great man. He is a valiant warrior. He's highly respected. Oh, and he's a leper. And that changes everything. Can you imagine? I mean, this was the ultimate insult for this guy. Because before long, Naaman, the valiant soldier, would be unable to swing a sword or grip a saddle or lead troops into battle. And instead, he would have to be avoided at all cost. And all those regal titles would disappear. And all that people would remember is, there goes Naaman the leper. I mean, you trust me, there was not a soldier in his army who envied Naaman now. The most ordinary foot soldier would glance at him and see all those medals and ribbons and conclude, as great as he is and as common as I am, I would not trade places with him for a second. Because Naaman was a leper. Now, somewhere along the way, in the course of all of his skirmishes, he happened to take a young Israelite girl captive. And we don't know a lot about her. In fact, next week I'll think a little bit more with you about her. But verse 2 says that she was a personal attendant of Naaman's wife. And she is the one who changed this story. All right, look at verses 2 and 3. All right. Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy. It's kind of interesting that this captive girl who was ripped from her homeland seems to be concerned for her master. I mean, maybe he was kind to her. I don't know. Maybe he really was a great man. I don't know. But she does seem to be sincere. And in verse 4, it says, Naaman went in and told his master, saying, Thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel. And then the king of Aram said, well, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. He departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 changes of gold of clothes. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, now as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. Now, obviously, Naaman takes this servant girl seriously. Of course, he's also desperate. But we get to look, when we read the story, we get to look at the story with the benefit of perspective and time. And we also get to look, like here's the New Testament. We get to use the New Testament as a lens and compare Naaman's desire to be healed with our need to a Savior. And with all that perspective, I think you can probably see the mistakes in Naaman's approach. There's two big errors. First of all, Naaman thinks that healing can be bought with sincerity and with valuable gifts. And what I mean by that is, I think Naaman is sincere. He obviously figured that since healing an incurable disease would require special power, that healing would also cost a lot of money. And so he brought with him to Israel a lot of money. 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold. I know those numbers don't mean much, but that's approximately 850 ounces of silver, which in today's market is worth about $40,000. A shekel of gold weighed, about 4/10 of an ounce. So 6,000 shekels of gold weighed about 2,400 ounces. And in today's market of about $500 an ounce, that would be worth about $1.2 million. And so you throw in the clothing for the king, and you are looking at a big amount of money. I don't think this captain of the army probably had $1.2 million lying around. I think he probably had to beg and borrow from his friends and his family. The soldiers may have passed the hat. The king probably contributed a large portion of money to this as well. And then as Naaman set off for Israel, everybody cried, Naaman, we're all rooting for you. Surely you have enough to buy the magic cure. Good luck. But he's about to discover you can't buy healing. Physically or spiritually, it's not possible. They're gifts from God. Here's the second error that Naaman makes. He believes that healing can be provided by someone other than God. Look at verse 6. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, and now as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. Now, why do you think that the king sends his letter to the king of Israel asking him to cure Naaman? What's the king going to do? Why do you think that happens? Well, I read this explanation, and this makes sense. All right, the servant girl had clarified that there was a prophet in Israel. She said, go to Israel, there is a prophet over here, and he can heal. Now, over here in this country, these pagan idolaters would have believed, well, if a prophet can heal, and a prophet will be low in the order, then definitely the king would have access to that magic wand or whatever. And verse 7 lends to that idea because of the king's response. Look at verse 7. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, who am I? Am I God to kill and make alive? That this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me. Do you understand what the king's saying? He's saying, I can't heal. I don't know how to heal somebody. And if I don't try, or if I try and fail, it might start a war between us and Syria. So what am I supposed to do? And while all this is happening, word gets out of the palace, and it reaches Elisha about what's happening. Look at verse 8. And it happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had tore his clothes, that he had sent word to the king, saying, why have you tore your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. No, the king can't heal. And no one in the kingdom can heal except one man, and that is God's man. And make sure that you understand this. Elisha can't heal because Elisha has magic healing powers. Do you remember that when Elijah went to heaven, if you go back and listen to this lesson from a few weeks ago, Elisha was overwhelmed. And he was basically saying, Elijah's twice the man I am. I need twice the amount of power he has. Elisha isn't some egomaniac. God is using him in a big way. See, there's a big truth that's hidden here. Jesus one time declared, Jesus said about himself, he said, I am the only way to heaven. Jesus said there's only one person who has the ability to heal your relationship with God, only one. That God is bringing his power into this one place. And the implication of that is, if you search elsewhere, you're wrong. All right, if you're sincere, it doesn't matter. If all your friends are rooting for you, if you've put everything on the line, it doesn't matter. God said, here's where salvation lies. It's in Jesus. There's one way to the Father, only one. Well, in this case, God has lifted Elisha and said, here's where healing is. It is pouring through my servant Elisha, who is standing in the gap between you and me. All right, so Elisha says, tell Naaman to come to me. All right, now let's keep going. I want you to try to imagine that this entourage pulls up in front of Elisha's humble little hut. All right, try to get this picture in your mind, verse 9. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, and he stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean. And I want to make sure that you notice this. Did you notice Elisha did not even go out and meet him? Naaman is powerful. He is famous. People idolize Naaman. And this guy, this famous celebrity warrior, does not even get a personal handshake from a humble prophet. Instead, Elisha says to his servant, Gehazi, that's his name, Gehazi, go out there and you tell Naaman to take 7 dips in the Jordan. Now, why is that? Why did Elisha do it that way? Why didn't Elisha come talk to him himself? Maybe he's demonstrating here that God is no respecter of persons. Maybe he's demonstrating here that to God it doesn't matter if you're wealthy or poor, whether you're idolized or unknown, because the ground is level in front of him. And I don't know if that was the purpose, but it sure seems like that message was communicated. And Naaman gets the message, but is not happy. In fact, I want to say here, and I read this in a sermon that was written by Stephen Davey, who's a preacher in Raleigh. He pointed out that Naaman's response is very typical of how many people respond when they hear the gospel, which of course is spiritual healing. Let's see if you can find what he means. Verse 11. But Naaman was furious, and he went away and he said, behold, I thought he will surely come out here and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over this place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? And so he turned and went away in a rage. Now, Stephen Davis said that response is how a lot of people respond to the gospel. There's 2 responses there. The first is, I think healing should come the way that I imagined it. Okay? The way that I thought it would happen. Naaman said, here's what I thought was going to happen. I thought there would be hocus pocus. I thought Elisha would come out in some long robes, and carry a few candles and wave his hands in the air and chant to his God. I thought there would be a show here. That was what he had in his mind. And of course, almost everybody recognizes some sort of spiritual hunger in themselves. But what happens with a lot of us is that we try to dictate how that hunger should be satisfied instead of listening to what God says. There's lots of ways that people try to dictate their own spiritual healing. They do it through other religions or through music therapy or for meditation and relaxation or good works or religious ceremonies. There's lots of things we do to try to satisfy this hunger inside of us, and then we're always upset when it doesn't work. And then what we tend to do is we blame God, as if God's the one that somehow failed us. That's not how this happens. All right? Naaman thought that this should happen the way that he thought it should happen. Number 2, I think something from my past should be good enough. Right? I think there's something that's happened in my life that should be good enough for me. Look again at verse 12. Naaman says, I hear that you're saying I should go bathe in this river, but you're not giving enough credit to the rivers that I know. Because see, Naaman is from Damascus. And the rivers of Damascus were incredibly beautiful, apparently. Anyway, I've never seen them, but apparently they were incredibly beautiful. I know this, the Arabs called Damascus the Garden of the World. And this was just clear, flowing water. And Naaman thought, well, if the rivers of my own world would be as good as the muddy waters of this insignificant prophet, why on earth can I not go there and be healed? But maybe this is a stretch, but I sort of like it. Stephen Davey wrote, Naaman represents the thinking of every generation. Thinking such as, I imagine cleansing from my spirit will come the way I think it will. And when it comes, I think we'll use some of the stuff from my own past, from my own world, from my own thinking, from my own life, and then sort of combine it with some hocus pocus and I'll be healed. Well, that's not how it works. You see, healing belongs to God, and God dictates how it comes. And so for Naaman to receive it, his only option was to humble himself and submit to God's instructions. The question is, would Naaman humble himself and listen to God's instructions? We'll keep reading, verse 13. Then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean? What great advice. See, they knew him. If the magic formula had been, all right, Naaman, go conquer a kingdom and you'll be healed, he would have said, all right, I'll do it. Naaman, go risk your life on some battlefield. He would have said, fine, I'll do it. Naaman, give me $1.2 million. He would have said, you've got a deal. So why not just go take a bath in that muddy water? And what's so hard about that? And of course, you could tell me, because I think it's pretty obvious what's so hard about that. It takes the loss of all pride and all pretense to say to God, I'm nothing. I'm a leper. I'm unclean. And you will accept nothing from me in payment. That's a hard pill to swallow. But that's what God is saying. Naaman, I don't want anything from you. You just have to humble yourself and understand that you are broken. And I've got the answer. And there was probably a moment of deathly silence. And then the servants had caught him on the carpet, and he probably just stood there stunned for a few minutes. And then he must have said something like, you're right. I'll do it. And so in verse 14, it says he went down and he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Now stop there and imagine the scene. Here is this magnificent man, and he comes to the edge of the Jordan with all of his, retinue, everybody with him, because he leaves behind his uniforms, he leaves behind all his medals attached, he leaves behind all the regalia of his position, he walks away from his chariots and his horses and his servants that bespeak of his power, and he leaves in the chariot $1.2 million, and he walks stripped down nearly naked into the waters of the Jordan River. Awkward. Well, maybe a little embarrassed, not too sure that he's not being foolish. And then he takes a breath and he goes completely under the murky water. And he comes back up and he wipes the water from his eyes and he looks at his ulcerated hands to see. No change. And he goes under again a second time. And he comes back up and he looks again, no change. And then a third time, under and up. A fourth time, under and up. A fifth time, under and up. There's still no change. Nothing is happening. A sixth time, under and up, and nothing. I mean, you got to wonder what's racing through his mind, because at this point, we're not told. What's racing through his mind, I have no idea, but we have every reason to believe that he took a longer breath than usual, and he went under knowing this was it. If this does not work, if this time does not work, I'm dead. If this doesn't heal, I won't last much longer. I will forever be Naaman the leper. But Naaman obeys, even after 6, what would be considered failed attempts. He went back under a 7th time, and I think he stayed under a long time. And then he came bursting back to the surface, gulping for breath. And his servants and the soldiers and all his retinue all look carefully and closely. And he wipes the water from his eyes and he looks at his trembling hands. And the Bible says in verse 14, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. And he was clean. Can you imagine the celebration that erupted on the banks of the Jordan? I mean, there's a Syrian dance going on. There's hugging and kissing and crying and shouting. Naaman, the great leader, is no longer Naaman the leper. And in the ecstasy of being a healed leper, Naaman would shout, I am cleansed. I am cleansed. Why was Naaman told to go under the water 7 times? I mean, what? 7 times? 7. I know you know that's a Bible number, but 7 times. I don't think Elisha just pulled that number out of the hat. I don't think it was to embarrass him. I read a few weeks ago in a Bible dictionary on the subject of leprosy. I read a really interesting point. In the Old Testament system, if a person had leprosy, they were to go to the priest. And if they claimed to have been restored or healed, there was a simple practice for the priest to perform. The priest was to take a bird and kill it and empty the blood of that bird into a basin. And then he would pour running water into that basin and make a mixture. And then the priest was to anoint the leper with this water 7 times. 7 dips for forgiveness. 7 times for cleansing. Folks, this is just the greatest story. And we're actually only halfway done because next week I'm going to share a second half. But for today, I just want to make sure you hear this. It's a lot easier to work for our spiritual healing than it is to just receive it. I mean, we love the idea of grace, but there is something in us that wants to work for our healing. It's difficult to accept a plan of salvation of which we were never consulted, which we can't really understand. But it is impossible to experience God's forgiveness without following God's plan and God's method and God's cure. 7 dips for forgiveness. 7 times for healing. And Naaman obeyed, and he was healed. Next week, I'm going to share the second half of this story. It's actually got a very interesting twist that's coming. And so I hope you'll join us next week for that. In the meantime, if you liked today's study, I wish you would pass it along to a friend. You can email them the link or post it on your social media page. Let somebody know that we're doing this right now. And I'd love to hear from you and let you know what you're learning or if you have questions to send them. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. We have a great church service coming up Sunday. I hope you'll join us for that. Also, if you missed Faith Promise Sunday, go to our website. You can make a pledge right there online this year. I hope you'll consider doing that. God bless you. I'll see you this weekend.